Here is the 2024 schedule for Utah. We're going to break it all down for you and give you a projected record for Utah as we continue this series. We'll start with this schedule and the non-conference games that they'll play. Southern Utah, Baylor, and at Utah State. And you might say, well, Baylor is in the Big 12 and Utah is now in the Big 12, but that is actually not a conference game. So this game was scheduled before Utah moved to the Big 12. And so they're leaving it on the schedule as a non-conference game. So that game will not count towards the Big 12 standings. That happened in the ACC. I think it was, I can't remember now, Wake Forest and Georgia Tech, or I can't remember the teams now. That happened in the ACC as well. Or maybe it was North Carolina and Georgia Tech, where they played a game that was not a conference game. So it has happened before. It's kind of weird, but they will play Baylor in a non-conference game. Their home schedule is Southern Utah, Baylor, Arizona, TCU, BYU, and Iowa State. So they actually only have 4 home games in the Big 12 in their conference games. Arizona, TCU, BYU, and Iowa State. That means they play 5 road games in the Big 12. And those road games will be at Oklahoma State, at Arizona State, at Houston, at Colorado, and at UCF. And then they'll also play, of course, Utah State on the road. So let's break it down week by week. They start with Southern Utah. That'll be a Thursday night game there in week 1. Then they play Baylor on September 7th at home. And then it'll be a road game at Utah State on the 14th. Back-to-back road games as they then go to play Oklahoma State in their first actual Big 12 conference game. Again, the Baylor game is not a conference game. So Oklahoma State will be their first Big 12 opponent that it counts towards the standings. They play Arizona on the 28th, and then they get a bye week after that. Then they play the other Arizona State on the road. Of course, they played them in the Pac-12. So some familiar territory there. They play TCU on the 19th. That'll be a home game. Then they play at TCU on October 26th. At Houston, I should say. And then they get their other bye week after Houston. They play BYU at home on November 9th. Then they go on the road to play Colorado on the 16th. Back home for Iowa State on the 23rd. And then a road game at UCF on the 29th, which is, I think, the Friday of that final weekend, the Friday after Thanksgiving. So you look at this schedule, and, is there a game you look at on the schedule and say Utah can't win? I mean, there's really not. That's the thing with the Big 12. It's going to be so wide open. If a team can kind of emerge as the top team, if they're better than everyone else in that conference, they have a real chance to go undefeated. But it's not going to be easy, just because I don't think you're going to see a team emerge like that, and you're going to have the teams beat up on each other. You look at the back-to-back road games, Utah State and Oklahoma State. That's their only back-to-back road games. That's split up pretty well at the home and away. They don't have any real tough stretches either. Really just Oklahoma State, Arizona. That's going to be their toughest back-to-back right there. That's going to be tough. To come out of those 2 games without a loss, I think it's going to be really tough. But let's see what the projected record is here for Utah. Projections from last year had this team projected to go 9-3. I actually predicted them also to go 9-3, and so did Athlon. But Vegas had the over/under at 8.5. So how many people went with the over and lost there? Probably a lot, because they finished just 8-4. But yeah, they were about where I think most people expected them to be. You had some that maybe had them a little bit higher, but with a really tough schedule, it was hard to see them doing much better than 9-3. Schedule, again, it's easier this year in a new conference and just the way it all sets up. So let's get to the projection, and this is the scale that we use. If it's a 50-50 game, it'll stay in the white. If it's under 20 or over 80, those are games where I think that it's almost a guaranteed win. 20-29, 71-80 games where I think the spread will be double digits. Games where a team will be a pretty decent favorite, but not a guaranteed win. And the 30-39, 61-70 games where I think you'll have a clear favorite, but not favored by a ton. Favored by about a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points. And again, we have a tier system that we actually use to do this formula. So let's start with the easy wins. You've got Southern Utah and Utah State. I know that game's on the road at Utah State, but Utah should just be a much, much better team. The Southern Utah game's closer to 100%, whereas the Utah State game might be closer to 80%. But I think they both wind up in the green. And those are games that Utah should win. It would be a pretty big surprise if Utah were to lose either one of those. Now, let's go to games. No games in the blue, actually. We go straight to the purple with Baylor, Arizona State, TCU, Houston, and BYU. So Baylor at home. I think Utah's probably going to be favored by 8 or 9 points in that game. Arizona State would be in the blue, but it's on the road. That makes that one a little bit tougher. TCU at home. Houston, another game that would be in the blue if it was at home, but it's on the road. And then BYU, that one would actually be in the blue if it wasn't a rivalry. I do kind of take into account if it's really close, I will kind of go conservative on these rivalry games. So you've got 5 games where they should be favored, not by a ton, but maybe by about a touchdown. And then you've got Oklahoma State, Arizona, at Colorado. How good will they be? It's just hard to say right now. I'm going to keep that as a 50-50 game, although I think Utah will be a better team. Iowa State is a team that could be pretty good this year. We'll see. And then they surprised last year. And then you've got UCF on the road. I think Utah is going to be a better team there, but that one's on the road. So the way the home and road games work, it does definitely play into the formula and the projection here for Utah. But what do you notice? No games where they're going to be a clear underdog. In fact, if I was trying to guess the spreads right now, I think there might be one game where they're going to be an underdog, and that's Oklahoma State, because it's on the road. Maybe they're a 3 or 4 point underdog in that game, but I think every other game they're going to be favored, and I think that makes Utah the favorites in the Big 12. But they have a lot of games here that they can lose. Not that they're going to be underdogs, but games that they can lose because, again, very competitive conference. So when you average all this out, you get a projection for Utah of 8-4. So 8-4 is the projection. How could you get to 8-4? Well, if they split all the 50-50 games, that would be, they'd have 2.5, technically 2.5 losses there. And then again, when you got these games in the purple, the odds would say that you're going to lose. If you've got 6 of those, or we've got 5 here, but let's say if you had 6, the odds would say you're probably going to lose a couple of them. So, maybe they lose. I know you can't lose a half a game, but let's say they lose 1.5 games in the purple, 2.5 games in the white. And that's how you could get to 4 losses. That's how you could get to 8-4. Again, when we're doing this formula. So 8-4 is the projection for Utah. Could they do better? Absolutely. Could they do worse? I don't really see them doing worse. I think 8-4, honestly, is probably about the worst case scenario. Let's just quickly kind of talk best case, worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, they lose to Oklahoma State, maybe lose to Arizona or Arizona State. TCU winds up being a lot better. They lose there. They slip up and lose on the road either to Houston or Colorado, and then maybe lose to Iowa State. So, yeah, I guess 7-5 is possible. That would probably be my worst case scenario. But best case scenario, this team goes 12-0. And, again, I think that's a real possibility. Again, Oklahoma State's the only game where they're maybe going to be an underdog. So if you just went by that, if you just went by who's going to be favored in all these games, you'd probably get 11-1 for Utah. Not saying they're going to do that, but they absolutely can. And Utah could absolutely be in the college football playoff because the Big 12 champion is going to be there. The ACC champion is going to be there as a top 4 seed. So that could be interesting. But Utah, it's really about winning the Big 12 in their first year. That's what they want to do. But a projected record of 8-4, do you think they'll do better or worse? Let me know your thoughts on this team down in the comments below.